Up next, continuing the topic of big data and marketing analytics, we have an industry session, and it gives me immense pleasure to invite on stage our first speaker of the session, Mr. V. Laxmikanth, MD, Broadridge Financial Solutions Private Limited. Broadridge Financial Solutions Private Limited is a wholly owned subsidiary of the US-based Broadridge Financial Solutions, a leading provider of investor communications and technology-driven solutions for broker-dealers, banks, mutual funds, and corporate issues globally. At Broadridge, Mr. Laxmikanth is responsible for delivery of product development and operations from its India-based centers across investor communications and securities processing solution businesses. His successful track record has won him numerous accolades, including being named amongst the best CEO in the country by the Asia Pacific HRD Congress, Women's Choice Award by the Will Forum, and India's greatest corporate leader by Zee Business. Welcome, Mr. Laxmikanth. Our next speaker for the session is Mr. Vijayanta Gupta, Director, Industry Strategy and Marketing, Adobe Systems, Europe. Mr. Gupta leads Adobe's industry-specific go-to-market initiatives for digital marketing across Europe, Middle East, and Africa regions. He also serves on the advisory board of Jigsaw Digital, a digital marketing company, of which he is one of the co-founders. Prior to joining Adobe, Vijayant has held multiple business development and consulting leadership roles in Accenture, Microsoft, and Tata Consultancy Services across UK, Europe, India, and USA. Welcome, sir. Our third speaker for this session is Mr. Sameer Dhanrajani, Business Leader, Cognizant Analytics, CTS. Sameer is leading the end-to-end business spheres of Cognizant Analytics and is primarily responsible for crafting differentiated strategies around analytics, consulting platforms, and services, coupled with creating best-of-breed GTM, business development, operational excellence solutioning exercises, and delivering transformational analytics engagements. As a recognized industry thought leader in outsourcing analytics space, Sameer has been recipient of Outsourcing Leadership Award at India Human Capital Summit and Exemplary Leader Award during the Asia Pacific HRM Congress Awards in 2012. He was recently highlighted in Analytics India magazine amongst 10 most influential analytics leader in India 2014. Welcome, Sameer. I request Professor to please moderate the session.
So it's usually, I was hoping to talk to a live crowd, okay? So, or an alive crowd. So let me try again. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, thank you, okay? So my name is Laxmikanth. I represent a company called Broadridge. And before I kind of start off, a little bit of disclaimer. So all the opinions expressed in the slide are not necessarily that of Broadridge, okay? And could some of them is my own individual opinion. Okay? So now that that part is kind of clear, just wanted to give my presentation. Probably I'll maybe spend 10-15 minutes. So what I intend to do is first provide a little bit of background of Broadridge, so you understand the context where we're coming from. Secondly, I think the Prof did a great job of talking about the specific techniques, so I won't get there. The good news is I also have some of my colleagues in the audience who actually do the work, okay? So they'll be able to answer some specific questions with respect to the techniques, okay? So I'll talk about how we built a kind of a big data practice and and maybe one or two case studies as to how we got some actionable insights, okay? So ours is more like a B2B kind of a scenario, so it may not be relevant to B2C kind of a situation. So please bear that in mind. Fair enough? Okay. So I guess this is what Broadridge is. Okay? Now you heard about it, right? So I'll have to call up Forbes and say, guys, you need to change your headline on this one. Now a lot of people have heard about it, so this headline is no longer relevant, okay? A little bit of background. Broadridge is a US-based firm. We spun off from a company called ADP about 7 years back. We're about $2.5 billion in revenue, about 6,500 people globally, 2,000 plus in India at this point in time. Okay? We operate in two segments. One is what we call as investor communication services that constitutes about 70% of our revenues, a little more than 70%. And the remaining is what we call securities processing services. Okay? Investor communication service is like shareholder communication. Anytime you are a shareholder in any organization or a corporate issuer, for a corporate issuer, all kinds of shareholder communication happens via Broadridge. We also facilitate the electronic proxy voting process. Okay, so at some point I'll talk to you about the kind of data that we collect in that particular process and why that's particularly relevant. The second segment that we operate is what we call securities processing. This is kind of post-trade processing. That is, once you have executed a trade, for post-trade processing in terms of clearing, settlement, corporate actions, etc., we provide a huge service. For the just high-level stats, we're pretty much a market leader in both the segments. For example, in the securities processing space, on an average day, we process about $6 trillion worth of security for fixed income instruments, 30% of the transactions on the New York Stock Exchange for equity, probably 60% on the Canadian Stock Exchange, on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So as you can see, just to set the context, we sit on a lot of data. So I think somebody asked the question, how do you get the data? We have a slightly different problem. We sit on a lot of data, and the question is, how do you get the insights out of it? So our challenge is slightly different there. Just to set the context and the kind of data that we sit on, 15 billion plus investor communications since 2004. This represents about 60 billion shares. We hold pretty much shareholder positions for about 130 million investors in the US. I talked a little bit about our fixed income leadership. Just to kind of, maybe on a lighter note, I think some people may get offended by the statement. We've been a SaaS business in 1962. Okay, I know that term was not invented then. Okay, in those days we used to call it EDP, electronic data processing. We used to be a data center. We used to write software, and then distribute the reports to various clients. So today, particularly in our business, we've been it's a managed service business. So we host our applications in our data center. We manage the end-to-end process, clients connect, and pretty much on a per transaction basis we charge. Okay. 200 petabytes of data under management. So don't ask me what petabytes means. All I know, there's a lot of zeros in that stuff. Okay. Pardon me? 21 zeros. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. So all I know is a lot of zeros there, and thank God the Indians invented zero. Other zeros struggled with that one. Okay. So for the next, so that gives you a little bit of context as to what the company is about and the kind of data that we are kind of sitting on. So needless to say, about maybe 4 or 5 years back, as the originally we were more focused on getting our revenues from processing. And as we acquired a lot of data and the world transformed towards, analyzing data, the question was, how do we get, revenues out of our data assets? That was pretty much the challenge that we had. And so we kind of approached it in, I would say 3 or 4 steps, and I'll probably talk about that journey and then get to those case studies. So this was pretty much the first step in the journey. I guess this is pretty much the first step that most organizations do. We know that we have a lot of data. We have absolutely no idea what we're going to do with it. So the big boss calls for a meeting and says, guys, you need to figure it out. Okay. And so that's how it all started. I think the journey started about 5 years back, or a little longer, where we decided that we need to harness our data assets. So when you look at the data assets and about how to harness it, and I think there are essentially 3 steps. First is what I call as the big data engineering part of it. The big data engineering, I think, is more about what kind of technologies that you apply to solve the problem. Okay. So if you look at this, I think there are essentially maybe 2 or 3 trends, and I think some of the speakers covered it this morning. I think the first thing, obviously, is that the volumes have gone through the roof. Okay, and pretty much today, every device is now a device capable of giving you data points. Okay, and anything that breathes, okay, or anything that can emit a little bit of data is now a collection device. Okay, so clearly the volumes have gone through the roof. And the traditional RDMS platforms are not capable of processing that kind of volumes. So today we are starting to see new trends in data engineering, primarily in-memory systems, large-scale systems like Hadoop, et cetera, et cetera. So the trend is, I think, is how do you process more records more efficiently? That's one part of the problem. And there are definitely technologies that kind of solve that problem today. And I'll talk a little bit in the next slide as to what kind of technologies that we have used. Okay. The second thing I think is a more important trend is the variety of data. I think the variety is a huge challenge in terms of the fact that you have multiple disparate sources. And if you really need actionable intelligence, it's about trying to get these sources into one place. Okay. And data aggregation and data warehousing is an integrated part of the strategy. And today you have a number of ETL kind of tools which enable this process a lot more seamlessly. And I'll talk a little bit about how we have implemented some of these tools. The third thing is the velocity trend. And I think velocity to me is about the ability to handle streaming kind of data, which means that traditionally you had data came in, you did processing in a kind of a batch mode. Today it's about you get data streamed, so you need to be responding more real time. Okay, so that's the third trend. So these are the three essential trends which actually to me classify as the big data engineering problems that organizations need to solve. Okay, and personally, if you ask me in order of I think the volume problem is a lot more easier. I think the variety problem is a lot more difficult because of the fact that you get data from a variety of sources and data is usually not clean. So this affords usually an opportunity for you to provide both the data aggregation and cleaning kind of services. So this is what we did essentially, and I think a lot of people are familiar with most of the names here. Greenplum is our preferred, you could say the database kind of a platform. So we've used that pretty extensively both in our investor communications business and the securities processing business. So our first step essentially was to take a look at all our data sets across the organization, across the various business silos, and figure out how do we create a data warehouse out of it. So essentially a combination of putting stuff in an appliance plus a fast database. Using ETL technology like Informatica was our approach to solve this particular problem. I don't think we are 100% there, but I would say at this point in time, probably close to 70–80% of our data assets have started to come through into our data warehouse. So obviously, once we asked the management to invest significantly in technology, obviously the management wanted to see the results, and this is what happened. Okay. Yes, I mean, if you invest only in technology, I don't think you'll get the actionable insights. It's like ordering for a pizza and the delivery guy comes and there's no pizza. Okay, so that's what happened, and we kind of figured out that 80% of the industry spends primarily on technology, producing only kind of 20% of the results. Okay, so big data. When you talk about analytics, it's not just a kind of a technology problem. So a lot of people get it wrong. They think that I just have to get Hadoop installed or Greenplum installed or Informatica installed, and somehow magically we will get insights once we have data in one place. So I think that's something which we also went through that, and we learned it probably the hard way. Just by having data assets in one place is not kind of good enough. Okay. So the second step, I think, is we decided to build a kind of an analytics plus or the statistics kind of a practice. And if you look at the two trends, I would say is essentially, we think about it, as we start to do the analytics, we figured out that the model is moved more to a kind of a pattern-based kind of a reasoning, more of the inductive reasoning rather than the deductive reasoning that we are all kind of used to. So we usually have a situation where, yes, we have a hypothesis, and then we use the data to kind of, say whether the hypothesis is right or wrong. And today, when you start to look at inductive reasoning, it's about you have patterns of data, and you need to really apply a combination of statistical techniques plus art in order to be able to kind of bring the whole thing together. So a lot of judgment is kind of required in this process. So traditionally, if you had gone with a very analytical kind of a mind, you would not really be able to get the results that you want. So I think the thinking is changed, and I think we had to invest a lot of time in getting people to start to think slightly differently with respect to thinking with patterns. Okay. So I was very actually when the Prof was presenting, I was very happy to see that in one of his slides he said all the planets are aligned. Okay. So I'd love to see how astrology also fitted in part of the marketing scheme of things. Unless the planets align, you don't get the results. Okay. So when you start to look at the analytics, I think again there are essentially two ways to classify data. Either you curve fit it or you essentially space fit it. Okay, of course there is simulation and optimization, but essentially I think this is how you try to channelize your data, or you make slices of your data in order to be able to. And there are enough statistical techniques around doing it. Okay, there are a lot of ready-made software today. You can take SAS, you can take R, etc. And there are hundreds of technologies or algorithms which are available. So one point I just really thought, which I kind of, as I've observed this thing over the last few years, is just like how Microsoft Excel in a way changed the industry dynamics probably 20 years back, how it brought the power to the desktop, and how the finance person need not have to wait for the EDP guy to give him a report. He could make actionable intelligence on his desktop. Similarly, today we are starting to see the various analytical packages starting to become more and more commoditized. So what probably took somebody maybe 2 months to develop 2 years back is probably readily available off the shelf. The algorithm is ready. You can probably do it in a day. And somebody in the morning was saying that you could get an app ready and running in a few minutes. Okay. So my contention and my submission here is, I believe that this will not be a differentiator over a period of time. Okay. That more and more algorithms will start to become more commoditized, and people will start to be able to use them more readily. I think the biggest challenge, I think, is what we call as data preparation or data sharpening. And that's one of the largest challenges when you have huge data to look at. You have missing fields, you have incorrect data, and we have found that almost like 70% of the time or even greater time is spent on actually getting your data right. Okay? Once you get your data right, the algorithmic part is a lot more easier. So as we develop the skills and as you go back to build your analytics business, I think you need to give a lot of thought both to your data collection process and to your data cleaning process. So worthwhile investment is required to get that right. If you don't get that right, as the saying goes, garbage in, garbage kind of out. Okay. Couple of things I think is, of course, I think the Prof talked about a little bit and others have talked in the morning, is the biggest challenge, I think, I'm a physicist, and in our days and even probably today, handling three-dimensional problems itself was a challenge. Okay, and I don't think physics has solved it yet. Okay, and so as we have seen, the dimensionality factor increase, exponentially in many ways. Okay, probably 2-3 years back, if you had 20 dimensions, it was a fairly complicated problem. Today, 150 dimensions is fairly common. Okay, and the issue is that as you add more and more dimensions to solve your problem, you get a lot of spurious correlations, and that actually is the most significant problem in actually trying to clear those correlations, where you need the kind of business expertise in order to be able to do that. And of course, I think somebody talked of the outliers and the class imbalance problem when you start to handle data sets. So if there's one takeaway from this particular slide, I would say that please focus on the data prep and data cleaning. Okay, that actually is a very significant problem in most applications. So this is what we learned after building the analytics capabilities. So normally this is what we do. Anybody whom we recruit for as an analyst, we ask him this question: you're going to get hired or not? You should know that, right? Okay. So what the point I want to make here is it's not just technology, it's not just stats. Okay. There's an X factor, or the third factor, that we need to really consider while building a capability out here. And that's what we call as data consumption, okay? There are two parts to the data consumption kind of story. One is, you have a lot of data, you need to be able to tell your story very well. And I think this is where visualization is a key component of building a big data practice, okay? And we all know that pictures say 1,000 words, so to speak. I think that's something which we learned probably a year back. We used to go to our management with, huge Excel sheets and, various, fine, output from great statistical programs. But in order to be able to, I think my friends from Grameener, who somebody is here, I think they say it very well. You need to be able to get a common mental model across the organization for thinking, and kind of visualization kind of helps that process, okay? The second thing is, once you're able to visualize, it's about getting all the business stakeholders into the room to see whether your story makes sense, because data may say something, but actually on the ground reality with respect to the story might not be real, okay? So you need to make sure the story makes sense. So next few slides very quickly. Just wanted to show you the power of visualization. So you have 10 seconds. Now we have 5 seconds. Is it easier? Yeah? Okay. It would have been easier when I had colored it in the other slide. So the point I want to make is, visualization makes a huge difference. Okay. So let's look at this again. So if you look at these numbers, average is the same, or around about the same, variance about the same. But you look at the graphs, the question is, are they really the same? Okay? Not really so. I don't want to dwell too much on this. I think the point I'm trying to make is that you need to be able to tell the story, and visualization is a great way to tell your story. Okay. This is a very important factor, and I think I would want to spend a couple of minutes on this. And this is what we call as micro-decisioning. This is like, you need to be able to get your technology team, your data analysts, and the business together in order for you to be able to make sense out of your data. And this process needs to be fairly iterative, and huge involvement of the business actually gives the best results. And the process is called micro-decisioning. There are two ways to approach the problem. One way is, is to say that here's my data, and let it speak for itself, okay? And then, let's make decisions based on it. The second thing is, here's the data. We'll also have the business input into this particular data, or the business sets some use cases for us to use, okay? There's obviously, pros and cons of that, but we have found it very effective to have, this capability built into the analytics team. As an example, what we did is, we have invested, I think, close to about, $4 million in building what we call subject matter experts who understand the business. And now they're part of the big data community, or the big data COE for Broadridge. So essentially, anytime there's an insight, they're able to validate whether the insight really makes a business sense. Or sometimes, they can look at data and say, why don't you look at it a different way? A simple example is, in one of the cases we are looking at, we provide solutions for the wealth management business, and we are looking at, whether this makes sense for an advisor. And the business guy who was sitting in the room said, okay, it may not make sense for the advisor, but makes sense for the treasury department, okay? So I think, having the business in the room when the data is looked at makes a huge difference to your end outcome. So this is what I think we need to do to build a big data practice. It's not just technology alone, it's technology plus analytics, plus having the business users, okay? So this is essentially what we have done, okay? We have a lot of associates with a lot of tenure, so there's a lot of domain expertise. We've invested in the right technologies. We've got a lot of people, technology guys certified in statistical analysis techniques, and we put all of them together. And the three use cases on the right, which is what we call shareholder data insights, wealth management analytics, and mutual funds, those are the three case studies. I'll probably spend time on one, and then there are other slides which we can share and I can discuss, because I think I'm running a little out of time, okay? Okay. This is a pretty interesting kind of slide, and I'll probably spend a couple of minutes explaining the business model so that you understand where we are at this, okay? This is how the, it's a fairly busy and a complicated slide, okay, or at least looks complicated. And if you look at it, the way the investor governance or the corporate governance market works in the US is fairly different from what it does here. So if you are an issuer and then you have investors in your company, they can buy shares to your company through two ways. One is they can buy kind of directly, okay, which is then you have to deal with a transfer agent, okay, just like in India, for example. Let's say you bought a share of whatever Reliance, maybe Carvey or CAMS would be a transfer agent who would communicate through you, okay. In the US, with that, if you held it that way, it's called as beneficial holding, and there's another concept called street side holding, okay. And so essentially you have an account with the broker-dealer, and in turn the broker-dealer actually executes the transaction. And then whether your name is registered with the company or not is an option which you have, okay. So it's called an omnibus kind of a holding and makes the process very, very complicated. So essentially, let's say if a company wants to talk to its shareholders, it needs to go direct and also needs to talk to every broker-dealer. There are about 600 broker-dealers in the system. And each broker-dealer in turn will have their own clients. They could be common clients across, okay? So if you want to send a communication to any investor, you need to have this community connected, okay? And in turn, if you want to have a proxy voting process done in the US, you need to essentially have this same thing. The process needs to go to broker-dealer's system and then to the individual shareholders. So it's a fairly complicated process. And the good news for us from a Broadridge perspective is we are the only ones sitting in the middle of it. Okay, we are the ones who sit and talk to every issuer, and we talk to every broker-dealer. Okay, so in that sense, that's the reason why I said we know the positions of almost 130 million shareholders in the US. Okay, what stock they hold, okay, when they bought, when they sold, etc., etc. And I don't think anybody else has that kind of data. Okay. And so this is very important for us because once we have this piece of data, the question then is what kind of analytics that we can provide our either the issuers or the broker-dealers or the individual investors themselves. For example, to an issuer, that is a corporate issuer, he may be interested in, let's say now this is a new, let's say say on pay, right? For example, executive compensation is a big item, right? So if they're going to have such a resolution, they would like to know which kind of investor would likely vote pro or against, right? It's a very, executive compensation is a huge thing. And so that kind of analytics information can come out of the system. Okay, we could come back and say that this is where your shareholding pattern is the maximum, so you may want to allocate your marketing dollars to that particular segment. Okay, so that is the power of sitting on that kind of data. The situation as of today is we're changing our agreements with our both the broker dealers and the issuers and the investors, so that we're able to use this data. We're probably halfway through the process. It'll take us maybe the next couple of years in order to be able to get that process. Then we'll be able to add a lot more insights to this process. Okay. The second case again is it's about mutual fund analytics. Okay, and again the system here is pretty much the same. You have manufacturers of products. I think there are probably about I have the numbers here. I didn't want to say something wrong. Okay. There are almost like 16,000 such players in the market. Okay, and they need to talk to they need to sell through the intermediaries to the end investors. Again, we have the same omnibus kind of situation where the manufacturer really doesn't know who is buying, and if you're an intermediary in the whole process, you're able to give them sales distribution kind of information. Where's your products getting sold the maximum, what's the performance, etc., etc. Again, if we combine that with our shareholder positions, we have a project where we can come back with analytics about what's a typical model portfolio a person should have in order to be able to generate maximum returns. Okay, so this is second kind of analytics. that we have generated for the mutual fund business. The third one is about, again, this is more, I would say, a technology problem. There are two parts to this particular use case. This is about, in the US, the cost-basis accounting has changed, which means that you need a lot more data to be pumped into the system in order to be able to generate. Cost-based essentially is calculating your capital gains. Okay, every time you calculate your capital gains, if the, let's say, long-term capital gains holding was, let's say, for 3 years to 5 years, then the way you look at data is very different. So this is more, I would say, a big data kind of a technology problem. This is again where we have used the Green Plum appliance. So I guess these were the three use cases. I'm happy to take questions at a I think at a later point in time. Actually, okay, I have this slide. So I'll end it on this light note. So anybody wants to take what is Q and I and P? Pardon me? Q is questions, I is insights? Prediction, right? This is a big data presentation. There's no answers to this, okay? We don't give Q&A. It's like Q and I and P, okay? So we'll be giving predictions. So I just want to kind of, thank you for the opportunity. And I want to kind of wish you all the best with your, journey in building your big data practice. Again, I just want to kind of end it on a very light note. A couple of days back, actually last week, Samir and I were on another session talking about big data, just last Saturday. And so Samir had a good 20 minutes of sleep at this point in time, okay? Listen to this one before. Samir, I'll do likewise, okay? And what happened was I was talking to my parents and my wife about big data, and they asked me what it is, and I was trying to explain to my mom what it was. And I said it's a very big thing, big data today, every lot of data is generated, and then they collect this data, and then they can predict, what you're going to do. So that night we were having dinner, and I did something, and then my wife and my mom were grinning at each other. And my wife said, I told you so. And I said, what? Then she said, I've been married to you for 25 years. Okay, I have 5 senses. I'm taking data from you for the last 25 years through all these 5 senses. I can accurately predict what you're going to do, okay? So there are other big data machines out there, okay, which are much more powerful. Okay? So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, good afternoon, everybody. Fantastic. We have some people who are awake. Great. My name is Vijayanta Gupta. I am from Adobe. I'm a part of Adobe's digital marketing business unit. I look after their industry strategy and industry marketing across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Technically, I'm London-based. However, if you ask my wife, she'll tell you I'm most likely based in one or the other airport in Europe, most of the time traveling. Now, what we are going to do today is, before we begin, just wanted to say one thing. I am from the founding batch of this school. So on behalf of the founding batch, I would like to welcome all of you to this summit, and you're really, really thankful for your investment of time, effort, energy, and money. Now, before we go ahead and talk about data and big data, and I think we've been hearing a lot of things about that, what I wanted to do was take a few moments to talk about customers, talk about marketers, and in that context, see what role data plays. So we'll go through a journey here. We'll see what we are faced with as marketers every day, what our customers are doing, what our consumers are doing. And as a part of that, it will become clearer the role that data plays and why data is so important. I would also like to introduce to you a model, which I typically use when I talk to my customers, to help them make sense of all those things that are happening in the world of digital. It's a model that you can use yourself, or if you're an advisor, you can use it with your customers. Now, this is my third time here at ISB Digital Summit. We need volume here, guys. Video. Now, every time I've started with a video, so I'm not going to go away from that tradition. We will roll the video now.
What are the answers you seek? I'd like to know if my marketing plan is working. Yes. Yes, it's working, or yes, you can tell me.
Yes, I can tell you.
Okay. Yes,
It's working.
Can you be more specific?
Some parts are working. Some parts are not working.
Perfect. So if you want to know whether your marketing plan is working or not, of course you need to wait for the alignment of the planets as we learned. But you don't have to go to a fortune teller. Data will tell you that. And that's the importance of data here. And before we kind of jump into that, what I wanted to do was very quickly walk you through some of the thinking that we are seeing marketers are going through right now in the in this space. Now, a quick show of hands, how many of you have read this book, The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler? 1, 2, 3, okay. How many of you have bought this book but never read it? Great, we have quite a few hands which are here. Fantastic. So Alvin Toffler is a futurist. He talks about what can happen in the future. And this is a book he wrote in 1980, where he kind of came up with the concept that human civilization and the human society has actually evolved in waves. And he talks about these three waves in which this human society has evolved. The first one is what he calls as the agrarian wave, or what led to the emergence of the agrarian society, farming, etc. The second one is what he calls as the industrial society or the industrial wave. And the third one, which he left us with in 1980, and I think we are still living through this, is the information society or the information wave. If you take a look at what has been happening in marketing, my theory is that we are going through some very similar kind of wave, which is transforming the way marketing actually works, which is transforming the way in which you and I engage with our customers, and which is maybe one of the reasons why you are here in this room today. You want to understand what is happening so that you can stay ahead of these waves. Now, in terms of what those waves are, a very quick overview. The first one, some time back, we started to see this website-centric wave of engagement with customers. After that came the wave where we started to see multiple touch points. Websites just became one of the touch points. And finally, we are at a stage now where we are talking about the fact that touch points are not important. What's important is the journey that the customers take across those touch points to achieve an outcome. And this is effectively the third wave. So let's kind of go through this in a little bit more of details here. The first wave, the website-based engagement wave. This was something that started quite a few years back. The theory there was that if I build a killer website, people will come and revenue will happen. Internet boom happened, people started investing a lot on internet technologies. And this was the time when, I would say in some sense, the golden age of internet. You could raise funds easily, you can build a website and quote unquote a business without a business model. But then something happened. What happened was that the market crashed. People realized that if you do not have a business model, there's no point in having a website. However, out of this crash came out few winners. We saw some winners. Some of them are speaking in this conference here. eBay, Amazon, Priceline, and you can pick your favorites. I have picked 3 here. And what they started to realize was the fact that if you have a business model backed by a website-based digital engagement strategy, it is actually sustainable. It can allow you to build a business, it can allow you to survive, and it can allow you to thrive. The other thing that happened during this time, during this first wave, is that as marketers, we started to realize that there was a way of actually measuring the effect of online advertising onto sales. And this was very, very important because until then, marketers never had a clear line of sight between what they invested in advertising and outreach and sales. It was always a correlation. It was always after the fact. With this kind of technology, with website-based digital engagement, we started reaching a stage where the marketing mindset started to change. You started to think about, okay, so if I invest this much, this is what I'm getting, and you could start to see the clear line of sight. That, by the way, was very soon, how do I put it, very soon overtaken by the second wave. And the second wave was when we reached a stage where customers were not only engaging with brands through websites, they were engaging with brands through a variety of touch points. I've got some of the touch points here. Phones, we heard a lot about how important phones are and how important mobility is. There is digital TV, there are digital kiosks, and this was the time when really big data started to become really, really big. This is where we started to get all that data exhaust that was coming from all the channels, because of which we are talking about big data today. And this also led to one other critical thinking in the minds of the marketers. One was that marketers were faced with a scenario where along most of these channels, the communication was two-way. And this was again very new for the marketers, because until then, what we marketers were very happy about was that we told consumers what the brand was. This took us to a stage where we were no longer telling customers what the brand was. Customers were telling each other what the brand was. And those of you who have been in marketing for a while, and those of you who have dealt with marketers, you will know that if there is one thing that a marketer doesn't want to lose control of, that's the brand. They always want things to be on brand. And this was a scenario where we started to see that marketers were starting to lose the control of their brand. The consumer had taken control. They were generating information about the brand that others were consuming and forming perceptions about the brand from. The second thing that happened was, very irritatingly, customers were moving from one touch point to another. People were not sitting in one place. You were doing some research in office on a desktop. You went on a train or your car. You started to do the same research on a cell phone. You went home. You did the same research on the iPad. So in your entire customer journey of trying to make a decision, you were jumping from one touch point to another. I do that. You all do that. And marketers don't like this, honestly. We don't like this because it makes things more complicated. Where do I reach out to you? Where are you spending your attention on? And of course, across all these touch points, you generate tons of data, which we need to analyze and make sense of, and then actually come back to you with relevant offers. So one of the things that started to happen during this time and during this wave, which by the way did not come in very many years back, this is hardly a few years old, is that we started investing in individual teams. So we built a website team, we built a mobile apps team, we built a mobile website team, we built an analytics team, a customer service team, and so on and so forth. And then we saw a plethora of teams getting created under the umbrella of marketing here. The other thing that happened, let me just quickly build through this slide, during this time is that marketers started to realize that every interaction has a digital footprint. It doesn't matter if the interaction is happening online or not. So if you go to a store and you swipe your credit card, you're leaving a digital footprint. If you go to a bank, you fill up a form for a mortgage, that will get digitized. And that is a digital footprint that you leave, which can be analyzed, which can be captured and analyzed. And this is where a very important thing happened. This was the time when marketers realized that we were not doing digital marketing. We were actually marketing in a digital world. And I'm going to repeat that. We were no longer doing digital marketing. We were marketing in a digital world. And it's a very small play of words, but it's a very giant leap for the marketing mindset. It is something that has changed the way we have started to see how we as marketers organize ourselves and how we use technologies, how we use people and processes to reach out to our customers across their customer journey, which is what the third wave is all about. This was the time when the marketers started to really become customer-centric, and they started to drive a change through the organization, which was focused on the customer, not on the touch point, not on the channel, not on what somebody is doing in a specific app, but more around what is it that they're trying to achieve, and across the board, what is the outcome that they're looking as a customer. And during this time, what marketers realized was that all these fantastic teams that we built, individual teams, they were coming in the way. They were becoming the problem in having a customer-centric approach in terms of looking at the customer from the customer's journey perspective. And fundamentally, where we have landed with all that is that there is an increasing realization with the customers that I talk to about the fact that this is no longer something that marketing needs to focus on, or this is no longer something that is only related to marketing. This is something which is going to affect the entire enterprise. We are reaching a stage where marketers have been given this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change the way the entire enterprise works. When you start to look at it from the customer journey perspective, you start to look at it from the perspective of not only marketing, but sales, fulfillment, HR policies, people that you hire, customer service, your supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. Now, some of you who have been marketers for a while, you will know that you have historically never had this kind of an opportunity before to transform the entire enterprise. The maximum we could have done as marketers was maybe change marketing. And this is the golden age, by the way, to be a marketer. Because this is the time where, at least in Europe, we are seeing the trend that more and more CMOs are being tapped for the job of a CEO. More and more. And this is not only in one industry, but across industries. So this is the time for us to be in marketing and to focus on the customer and the customer journey. Now, all that is good. We can talk about that in terms of the 3 waves and what's happened and what is going to happen. The question that I get asked, and the question that I'll ask all of you is, are you ready to ride this wave, or do you want to get drowned? I'm sure none of us want to get drowned here, but fundamentally, how do you know that you are ready? And it kind of boils down to the fact that you have to figure out how mature your digital marketing is, how good it is, how fit for purpose it is. This was a question that was coming up to my team across the world by a lot of our customers and marketers. Constant question: where do I stand vis-a-vis my competitors? What am I doing right? What are my competitors doing right? Can you help us understand that? We as Adobe, we run some of the, or on our platform, some of the largest marketing programs in the world are run. We analyze around 17 trillion transactions every year. So we have a perspective in terms of what's happening in the market and what's not. And that's why our customers kept on asking that question. So we got so sick and tired of answering that question that we came up with a model which customers can use themselves. And we don't need to keep answering those questions by themselves. So stay with me here. We're going to go a shade deeper into content here. Slides are going to get busier and busier, but just stay with me here because this is important. First of all, your customers engage with you across channels. Yeah, and by the way, some of the font is not right. So I know how to make PowerPoint slides. It's just that the font that we are using in the computer is not there. So some of the writing is kind of messed up, but nevertheless. Customers engage with your brand across a variety of channels. When they do that, they generate a lot of data. That data allows you to build audiences, segments, and it also gives you the indication of the context within which somebody is interacting with your brand. Am I researching? Am I there to buy? Am I there to recommend it to a friend of mine? What's the context? And that's what the data tells us. Once you understand the context, you can start to serve the right content across a variety of devices to your customers across each one of those touch points. Online, offline, doesn't matter. The thinking is you have to look at the data, you have to have the content, bring the two together. That allows you to be more personalized. And finally, as a marketer, you think about the world in terms of campaigns. So you got to run your always on campaign, which should follow the same basic best practices, and then you will have specific campaigns that you will use to deliver marketing returns. So I'm going to build this in one slide. This is a very ugly slide, but I needed to bring everything together so that we can have this conversation. So we spoke about channels. We spoke about data, audience, and context. We spoke about the content and the assets that are delivered to your customers through those channels. And by the way, we spoke about the campaigns that we run across all those channels to deliver that consistent customer experience. So 7 things: channels, audiences, content, context, asset, campaigns, and data. You all with me here so far? Fantastic. So these are the 7 key areas that we noticed our customers were focusing on. You can call them in any number of names. Some people call it a personalization journey. I'm doing a digital transformation. I'm changing my marketing systems. I want to run a customer excellence program. Doesn't matter. Fundamentally, they were looking at these 7 building blocks as they were going through this journey and as they were trying to figure out how ready they were for this particular wave that was coming at us, the 3rd wave of digital engagement that we're talking about. So how do you figure out? And how do you can figure out where you are? How can our customers figure out how they can do this? So what we did was we took all the data that we had based on our 17 trillion transactions and the engagements that me and my team does around the world, and we kind of came up with this Adobe Digital Marketing Maturity Model. The website is adobemarketingpro.com. It has got nothing to do with Adobe, apart from the fact that it's got an Adobe logo on it. You don't need to use any of the Adobe products. It talks about those 7 areas that I spoke about, and it gives you an idea of where you are vis-a-vis your competitors. So everything that I spoke about, the 7 areas, it will walk you through that step by step and it will ask specific questions in terms of where you are. Not only that, it will do the industry benchmarking. So depending on the industry that you are in, it will tell you vis-a-vis your competitors where you are, how good you are, where you stand, whether you are best in class, whether you are laggard, whether you are somewhere close to the average. And this is a good starting point. At some point in time, you will go through this transformation, but it's a good starting point to start to know what is it that you need to know before you can go for a transformation. It's a good starting point for you to know where you stand vis-a-vis your competitors. And the good news doesn't only end there, it also allows you to set your goals in terms of what your goals are from a digital marketing perspective, from people process technology perspective, and then it gives you a roadmap in terms of where you are and what you need to do to achieve that goal. So it's a reasonably detailed assessment. Takes 15 minutes, the results are reasonably detailed. And it's all built into the tool. It's free for everyone to use, so there is nothing that you need to do to use that. You just have to go to that website, adobemarketingpro.com, and start to do your own assessment. So if you are a marketer, you can do it for yourself. You can do it every 3 months to see whether you are progressing in the right direction or not. If you're an advisor to marketers, you can use that to help you with your client engagements. So to wrap it up, we are at a stage in the history of marketing where we have been given this opportunity to transform the entire enterprise, which we never had before. And I would assume that as marketers, all of us would like to grab it with both hands and actually run. Maybe not run, ride the wave. The second thing is, if you want to know how ready you are for this transformation, please go to adobemarketingpro.com, do the assessment, figure out where you are vis-a-vis your competitor and what you need to do to bridge the gap, if any. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, VLK, Vijayant. I think that's what happens when you are the last. They've covered all the things what I wanted to cover. Still, I think what I would be showcasing out here is a bit different. Very well contextualized to big data, marketing, analytics. But what I did in my slide deck is something which is very, very, I would say, factual. What you would see in these slides, which I would be showcasing, would be an amalgamation of thoughts, perspectives we gathered from 25 CMOs. We did a kind of a conclave actually a few months back, and we called CMOs from different organizations across the globe and asked them a variety of questions about what they are feeling, as Vijayant and VLK said, about this whole piece around things going digital, share of wallet getting very, very shrunk in terms of the spend, because there are options. There is an era or a piece, what we call hyper-personalization, which is catching on, and also about what they feel analytics could do for them. And honestly, those insights were very revealing. And before I dwell into that, let me kind of give a brief context to what we do in Cognizant as part of analytics. Cognizant, in fact, took a stance 3 years back to reshape their business. They created 3 towers. They call it horizontal in their own parlance. Horizontal one was their technology, ADM, and the normal, I would say, piece where all the horizontals and the large verticals lie. It's about 85% of their overall business, the bread and butter, and pretty, I would say, fast growing. Horizontal 2 was the businesses and the practices they invested 3 years back, 4 years back, and have started reaping the benefits in terms of they becoming very critical mass in terms of the number of work they do or the projects what they do, which was BPO, consulting, and remote infrastructure services. What they came out in the third tower was interesting, which has become a norm today, what we call SMAC, Social Mobile Analytics Cloud. SMAC was the thing which we patented. Of course, now that's a different thing. The competition is using more than us. But idea was very, very clear about seeing those disruption in terms of the IT models and IT industry. And with a very clear, innate understanding that customers are not going to take the bandwagon of technology in the usual ADM manner as they have seen over the years, but they will gradually start earmarking budgets into the SMAC category. And it's happening over the last 3 years, how you've seen practically every IT service provider, consulting organization have created entities around SMAC. They're getting morphed into digital, but the reality is today that SMAC is here to stay. And when we talk about SMAC, analytics, which is the A component, is the most, I would say, pivotal piece in this entire SMAC. What we do as part of overall Cognizant Analytics as a separate practice, we are close to about 2,500 people, and we hire a lot from B schools, and a chunk of them are from ISB. We are servicing close to about 300 odd clients across different genres of analytics and I would say industries. And we have done close to about 1,000 odd projects last year. This year, tentatively, we'll close to about 1,500 odd projects. Now, what we say to make analytics simple outside of the jargons and the parlance or the acronyms what you use, usually in the marketing context, and when we say marketing context, it's a reality. 45% of the budgets today across analytics are being spent in marketing or from the marketing organization. Rest could be on the risk side or the operations, which is pretty much the supply chain or let's say HR, IT, ops and all. But that's how the conversation starts with most of these executives. And that's what their pain areas is, that we are data rich, information poor, insight starved. We are data rich, information poor, insight starved. Can you help solve our problem? And that's where, to our, I would say, understanding the whole projects, the pursuits, and the engagements of analytics start. Now, I think the bedrock, what Vijayanta and VLK rightly covered, is nothing but the data detonation. The deluge of data is throwing multiple complexities in the system today. Any organization looking at what we say are traditional and I would say the online channels, or what we say in our parlance, the omni-channel, is getting worried about this data deluge. I'll give you the reason why. 60 seconds. While I'm talking, this is what is happening across channels. Well, let me take some of the crucial ones which are important purely from giving a perspective and idea about what CMOs are talking about. Now, I think this is what the real challenge, what the CMOs are facing today. We're talking about a traditional aspect of looking at very less of metrics, KPIs, and an aspect where we're talking about there are metrics and there are insights. I mean, through virtue of conversation with them, we came to a realization that 10 years back, there were just 6 KPIs for a CMO to take a decision about the marketing spend. It's today about 50, close to about 48, 50. So looking at that, and when we're talking about the whole shift, as Vijayanta and VLK mentioned, it's about the whole piece around hyper-personalization, individual campaigns for individual customers. I'll just give a very live example of a project, a large project we did for a beverage company, and we at third party are not supposed to disclose the client name, but pretty much it's a very large beverage company. The mandate was simple. The CMO said, I've got about 2 billion consumers across 210 geographies. I want you to find out the negative sentiments of 2 billion consumers in about 200 odd geographies. He took out some of the geographies for being outliers, and give me a real-time update about what those consumers are saying negatively about this particular brand. Simple mandate. And he wanted a refresh of this entire system every 60 minutes. Which means we are talking about the whole series of blogs, tweets, and anything happen around social to come to the desk of a CMO where somebody says, hey, this beverage sucks, or I didn't like this beverage because of whatever factors. That's the power of analytics we are talking about from a marketing side. Cut to a situation, we did a project for a large e-commerce company. Now that's a reality, an Indian e-commerce company. You look at the deals, what are being made every day in terms of Amazon doing, Flipkart, Snapdeal. This particular e-commerce solution provider said they want to change their pricing of about 170,000 SKUs every 60 seconds, based on demand, based on inventory, and based on what consumers are looking at the net on a real-time basis. In a normal analytics parlance, this is a dynamic pricing mechanism model you make. But we are talking about linking this with the spends, what that e-commerce company will do as part of those investments. We are talking about an optimum inventory level. We are also talking about a logistics supply chain scenario to service those demands. And when that particular model was implemented, it gave a 25% burst of sales in next 1 week. Now that's a different thing. The competition took it fast and replicated the same thing through a different service provider. Now this is where we are talking about a real-time personalization and also how the media and the marketing budgets are being spent today. This is what some of the numbers, which when analyzed gives a very, very startling features. I mean, the third one, or rather the fourth one is very important. 80% of CEOs think they deliver a superior customer experience, but only 8% of customers agree. Now that's where, to VLK's point at Vijayanta, the challenge what we are facing today from analytics point of view, we can talk about the spends, we are talking about the budgets. 50% of the analytics projects are getting aborted by the consumers. And as a thumb rule, only 1 out of 8 models, any model, acquisition model, cross-sell, retention, only 1 out of 8 model is getting implemented in the market. Now look at those scenarios. We're talking about a very oxymoronish situations. There is one side, there is a clamor, there is a rage about analytics. On the other side, 50% of the projects are getting aborted, and only 1 model gets implemented out of 8, which doesn't take out the 7 models in terms of the efforts, which is the same. Now that's the kind of a predicament the industry today in analytics and for, let's say, the organizations which are consuming analytics are facing. Now these are some of the market dynamics and challenges. And now just to run with this slide, and if I dovetail with this, the key imperatives, which means that we are talking about high customer acquisition cost. This is a normal kind of a principle that to retain every customer, companies are spending almost $5 more for every marketing budgets they are spending. And the propensity and the churn rates we are talking about, that for 5% of the customers getting retained in any organization today, there is an uplift on the bottom line of about 25%. 5% retention, 25% uplift on their bottom line. That's where the whole correlation works in terms of the marketing. Now this is where ultimately it's boiled down in terms of the right channel, the right content, the right customer, and the right target segments. I'll just rush through some of the slides just to give a perspective. Now this is the thing which is changed phenomenally. When we talk about marketing, we talk about big data. As VLK mentioned that there are 3 V's, we all agree: velocity, volume, variety. But I think for marketing, one of the most critical element today is the value. I mean, irrespective how the model gets built or the kind of a data, structured, unstructured, gets kind of amalgamated, synthesized, unless the value is getting derived, it doesn't kind of work. And today, when we are talking about marketing, the omni-channel presence is causing problems for a lot of businesses where they're trying to redefine the whole business, what we say, process. I'll give an example. This is a typical onboarding process for a credit card consumer, a banking organization which is servicing credit cards. This is what the model today they use in terms of an onboarding process. Now look at the channels on the left and on the top. We're talking about multiple channels, multiple intrusions in terms of what we say customer acquisitions. And each and every touch point in this entire process is laced with analytics. And that's where the definitions for analytics change when we talk about marketing that today is getting so pervasive. The entire life cycle of a consumer, right from an acquisition to retention to cross-sell to upsell, is getting impacted through analytics. How exactly? This is what the whole capability set looks like. Across the whole value chain, when you look, there are capabilities of analytics everywhere. Now, when you look at this plotting of a customer life cycle from acquisition to kind of a growth to retention to cross-sell, upsell, even looking at a lifetime enhancement, we are talking about 800 plus capabilities in analytics from marketing analytics side. Now, for an organization like us or even any other service providers or consulting organization, how do you grapple with those 800 capabilities where the consumers or the marketing executives who are wanting to use analytics are saying, how exactly we should be using this entire 800 set of capabilities? I think that's where the answer lies. If you look at this entire digital framework, this is what we say the new normal all about. We are talking about change from a traditional marketing channel to a framework where we are talking about the insights, we are talking about hyper-personalization, individual campaigns, offers for individual customers. We are also talking about how those interconnected devices, the mobile, is throwing new ammunitions for the marketers to say that, okay, let me try that example as well. I'll give a case study out here. We did a project with one of a airport. Now, airport seems very distinct and cliche when we talk about the analytics, but they actually have a chief marketing officer. They service close to about 60 million passengers on an annual basis. And the challenge what they're facing that only 8% of those 60 million consumers or the passengers are frequent shoppers. They wanted to build a platform where they know which are those 16% or 32% set of consumers who are likely to buy more and buy a variety of stuff, and how do they retain? Because that airport is at a cusp where there are a lot of cannibalization happens from other airports. Now, this is where we are talking about taking a digital framework, infusing that with analytics, giving it a twist in terms of a mobility, and storing all the data on the cloud. And what happens in terms of the respective individual passengers or consumers, they tweet, they kind of take it on the social, so everything in terms of a SMAC comes together. I'll just stop out here. In fact, I don't want to run through the case studies because of the paucity of time, Professor, but happy to take any questions with the group.
So let's continue with the Q&A. So next question.
One question, please.
And there was a question from that side, which...
There's this saying, like a lot of people have said, oh yeah, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, there's someone above us who's always watching. And today that thing has become true. The satellites above us are watching and all the data is being collected. And I see myself sitting in different servers across over here. So this is how the data is, and this is where I see myself, and it's quite scary. The reason why I ask this thing is, especially in a pharma kind of industry, where you look at data, which is the predominant and the most crucial thing that you talk about. There is PI and SPI data, the private information data or sensitive privacy information data. So how do you classify, how do you take care of this kind of data in different industries and ensure on the security of data, because you're collecting data. If you do not do this, there could be a lot of issues that the organizations could face. So this is something also a little scary at the same moment.
I think let me take a stab at that. I think your first piece is right when you say about analytics, as we say in a very lighter way, in that in God we trust, rest everyone should bring data for the decisions or whatever. Now, I think this is number one concern when it comes to anyone consuming analytics in a big way about the privacy. I mean, there are norms, there are today regulations by the banks or insurance or even retail companies, but honestly, there is always a bypass. Now, this is where most of the organizations like us, or even who are servicing clients on analytics projects, are doing. Usually we see that today there is a trail a consumer leaves when they search or surf through different, I would say, sites. It could be Amazon, Pandora, Netflix, could be anything. Everything leaves a trail. And when the trail is gauged, individual algorithms are being designed to run campaigns. Now, here is the caveat. If those trails are being taken and you're trying to synthesize and run a whole sequencing, standard deviation, and a kind of a, let's say, indexing, you're building a model. The moment you try to get the personal information and then try to run models, we are breaching that. And that's where most of the marketing executives are realizing that as long as the personal information is not breached or not touched while designing campaigns or doing any kind of analytics projects, it's running good. It's a kind of an integrity kind of, let's say, you can say that today most of the organizations, though, not falling, because personal information is so easy to get an access. Everyone is saying why I should waste kind of effort to draw campaigns where I just have to look at personal information and kind of go through the credit scores, the kind of different kind of information what that consumer uses. But I think the phase is changing where most of the analytics providers are realizing that there is a merit for the longish nature of this game, that they aggregate the data and give those sample kind of results rather than just throwing, okay, this is what we can do.
Yep.
Yeah. This is an open question to everyone, actually. Yep. From a point of view of a startup, not from a large corporation which is already generating a lot of data, from a point of view of a startup, how would somebody like a fresh digital company make use of any kind of analytics at all on any data if they want to start off with this?
I think if today, and this is what we were talking outside, me and VLK, anyone who's benefited out of analytics are the startups actually. I mean, look at the stream of startups which have their different genres and different enterprises, how they're mushrooming and how they're coming up. So this is what is, I would say, critical for a startup. And we do a bunch of collaboration and lines with the startups in analytics because it's very difficult to kind of create those capabilities in-house. I think what they're realizing is, as part of a niche boutique kind of a concept, startups are going into those areas which, what we say, meets the unmet desires of the consumers on a very, very specified basis. It could be a case of, let's say, a text analytics. It could be a case of, let's say, a natural language processing. It could be a case of, let's say, a clickstream analytics or even a visualization. Now, startups over there are coming out with those very, very topical offerings, or what we say ready-to-play platforms, or let's say solutions for most of the larger organizations, or even let's say for the consumers, very easy to relate with because they have a specific meat which are getting kind of consumed by those industries. Now that's where for them to look at those specific data sets, specific kind of, let's say, progression about where those structured, unstructured data lie is easy because they're not catering to a larger sample set. It's very, very restricted and very, very, I would say, niche in terms of what they need to service.
Adul, I think my comment is you need to figure out what your differentiator is going to be. Meaning that if you're different, let's say if you're in a business where, you know, the product which you are selling and the information that you're collecting can be replicated by someone very easily, then it's going to get replicated very easily. So the question is, how do you create data assets that only is, you know, individual to you and your company? I think that should be the approach, wherein initially it's more about, you know, using regular analytics and BI kind of stuff, but over a period of time you need to collect data which nobody else has. That's when you have the differentiator, I think. That and just to answer the question on the PII, that is I think, personally, I think the private, this is my personal opinion, okay? I think this privacy bus has left the station, so to speak, okay? And lot of information is already there, so we need to figure out first how to kind of retrieve it, okay? And I agree with Samir on the fact that aggregated information or derived works is what, and what today at Broadridge we do, we sit on a lot of PI kind of information. We ask our specific clients as to what information we could use and not use, okay? And that's pretty much the approach. Right?
So can I just add something to that in terms of the privacy thing, because I think we spoke about anonymizing the data and kind of building anonymous segments. I think some of the responsibility for privacy actually falls onto us. We just cannot point the finger at the government or the enterprise. And I think as consumers we need to fundamentally remember that if we are not paying for the product, then we are the product. Somebody will use us as the product. So you use Facebook, you don't pay for it. What are they going to do with that? They are going to use you as the product. And I think that understanding is critical for us to absorb, internalize, and be at peace with. Because this is the future. This is what's going to happen. We can keep debating about privacy as much as we want. But as it was said, there is enough data out there for you to even combine anonymous data sets to come up with very specific targeting, which will be so unique to you that you will feel spooky. This gentleman wants to ask a question for a very long while.
Actually, that segues very well into my question. I was just wanting to build further on the lady from Reliance's question, and my question is directed both to you, Vijayanta, and or to Samir. I wanted to understand a little bit as to what is the state of the art or best practice currently in tracking those multiple touch points of the journey that you've all talked about, actually to be able to link online and offline purchases. We all understand how people can track, predictive analytics based on your website behavior on your smartphone or your social media. But what is the state of the art in that complex journey? What all tracking can people, good practice marketers, actually do to actually be able to track down to the physical offline sale? That would be interesting to understand.
Sure. Do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I think this is where, honestly, let me put it this way. We've done multiple projects on what we say, looking at how do we derive a kind of meaningful insights by dovetailing both traditional as well as online or omni-channel kind of, let's say, data. This is the caveat out here. The results, when we take, let's say, a banking insurance organization using omni-channel kind of, let's say, mediums and trying to kind of optimize their budgets or look at tracking their customers or even optimizing their sales. The results are different when a retail organization is trying to use versus an insurance versus a life science. The reason is what we say as a part of what we say as part of our parlance are key attitudinal preferences of the consumers, which are different for each and every industry. To give an example, if somebody is trying to, let's say, go through a trail of surfing, let's say, Pandora for some jewelry, and then going to Washington, kind of, let's say, Post to read some articles, what's the relevance you can draw? It's tough. Now, that's where again, I will take an example. Sometimes many of the organizations take a call looking at the LinkedIn, the behavior, or the kind of association a likely candidate has, or rather a person has. But it's often a kind of a, let's say, situation where the person has done by his own or her virtue of networking or collaboration with a lot of the bigwigs, even though that person is at kind of quite a junior level. Now, when you look at this aspect, what we say a traditional let's say the novel channels of marketing or the omni-channel, it's something what we say that the idea today is not looking at, okay, when you're using, and when Professor was doing that session, we've used even different techniques through SAS and R. I mean, a random forest model today has a 3% more incremental efficacy when you do a simple logistic regression in SAS. Does it change for, let's say, a marketing guy? No. Now, that's where to the point what I think when the earlier question was there. Today, when we look at this social channels and use analytics, there are no heuristic kind of studies, honestly, which gives a very, very high efficacy that the model will be successful. Compared to traditional where we have those repository of data, we have those proven, I would still say, to be candid out here, that medium is still going through a phase where there are no set formulas, this works, this doesn't work.
Sure, and just to add on to that, I mean, this is a question that keeps coming up quite a lot. And my answer has always been the same to this, and that is that if you don't have a unique customer ID across all those channels, there is no way you can track that customer journey deterministically with 100% surety. So that's one thing that needs to be understood. Now, the unique customer ID can be a credit card, a loyalty card, n number of things that you can do. Now, there are other ways to kind of figure out when someone went from being an anonymous visitor to actually an identified customer. And when somebody identifies that, then there is a way using technology to kind of backtrack all the things that happened in certain channels and attribute it to someone who identified themselves. So there are some banks who will do that. There are some retailers who will do that. And it kind of boils down to the fact of being able to do cookie stitching across a variety of channels, if possible, or being able to do time-based correlation. If I did something and immediately some other result happened, you can with certain confidence say they are correlated. So, I mean, just to summarize, if there is no unique customer ID, very difficult for you to say for 100% this is exactly the same person. But as Samir was saying, that you can within ranges of confidence predict using a variety of data sources whether it was the same customer or not, and work with that and work through that.
And maybe to your point, Vijayanta, what we use in analytics parlance, as you rightly said, for the lead optimization or even for, let's say, using different channels is A/B testing and cohort analysis. Yeah. So that's something which is also handy in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a question. I'll make a statement and then I'll get to my question. See, when I'm hearing all this presentation, I'm seeing a lot of prescriptive advice to the companies, that we could do so many things with your data. And when I see Mr. Laxmikanth's presentation where he talks about a very big defect in the data, which is often it is not complete, there are a lot of issues in gathering the data, putting it together. And when I'm seeing that we are moving to a digital age, I'm not seeing any prescription to the organization as to what is the level of preparedness that is required within the organization. Traditionally you've seen organizations, I'm talking about the brick and mortar manufacturing, this big data is used in supply chain, in sales, in finance, right across the spectrum. And they've always worked through a simple ERP or a very sophisticated ERP model. So what's your advice on the level of preparedness required in terms of technology, in terms of orientation of people within the organizations? And even, is there a requirement for having a chief data officer or something like that? Or everybody's a chief data officer within the company?
VLK, you want to start with that? Because it started at data stage, so.
I think, just to kind of say, for us, our journey was, it took us about 4 or 5 years now, or a little longer. And our first thing was, first we identified the data assets that were across the company. Then we put it together. That was the first part of the process. And when we were putting it together, we realized, where the cleaning up requirements were high. So we really put together a team which started to clean up the data at the same point in time. So there's a technology element, which is you have to buy the high-end machines to process your volumes, and there's a BPO element of cleaning the data. There's an integration element. After that, you need to invest somebody, in my opinion, somebody who understands technology, who can do analytics, the statistical part. Then you need somebody who puts in the business. So you need to put these 3 teams together. And normally, it's, in my opinion, at least it could be faster now. It's usually a 2 to 3 year kind of a process before you get it right. And depending on how big your data store is and how large the the analytics team you want, my suggestion is start very small. Okay, think of it like innovation. Okay, assume that out of the 100 things, 99 are going to fail. Okay, if you don't approach it that way and you expect that every analytics insight is going to, it will not work out. So even a small member, 5-10 member team would be a good start. That would be my recommendation.
You guys want to add something to that?
Well, let me take this thing. I think the first differentiation, what you see on the lighter vein is VLK is consuming analytics and we are selling analytics. So as business leaders, we are supposed to sell whichever is the platform, whether it's ISB or outside. And as a sidebar conversation, I was telling VLK in the hope of he giving business to Cognizant that today none of the enterprises are actually, or rather large, let me rephrase, large set of organizations are not earmarking separate budgets for analytics. Let's put it very clearly. There are two phases as VLK and Vijayanta rightly, I would say, position. One is a phase, can I jump in? Can I see? Can I try? Can I test? Can I explore? And then there is a phase where there is a push within the organization because of the legacy systems, because of the data deluge, where it's coming out as a part of maybe a kind of a competitive advantage that can we start doing that. Now it's a shift for players like us or its owners, I think, on everyone today who's associated with growth of analytics is how do you move from a competitive advantage to situation to table stake. And the phase is so, I would say, small. I think in next 3 years, we'll be talking about analytics being table stake. That's for sure. That's where I think from a maturity, infancy perspective, every organization is trying to go through that kind of a riddle that, okay, what works for me when it comes to analytics?
Just kind of want to add to what I said a little bit and add on to the comment. We identified that data was an asset, that is, the investor communications data. So our two-pronged strategy. One is, build an analytics team which can kind of mine this data and give an analytics. Okay. Second part of our strategy is any acquisitions we do, we look for those companies having data which are complementary to what data set we have, so that the data ecosystem kind of spreads. So from today overall for Broadridge, from analytics or big data, we have recurring revenues about $50 million a year. Bulk of it is through acquisitions which use our data. So.
Can I just add one more thing to you? You mentioned about CDO, Chief Data Officer. We typically see that role in enterprises. Sometimes they're called Chief Digital Officer, also responsible for all data. Yes, there is an inclination for organizations to start by having that kind of a role and that kind of organizational entity. But I was talking to one of the CDOs some time back, and what he mentioned to me was that the success criteria of his role is that his role will not remain after 2 years in the organization. So that's the journey they are taking. That at this point, yes, kind of get everyone together on the data bandwagon, figure out what data is clean, what is not, work through that, build that organization. But at some point in time, it should be a part of the DNA of the organization, and you should not need that kind of a specific role just focusing on, managing data.
Thank you, gentlemen. May I now request Mr. Vinay Krishna to give away the token of appreciation. Thank you. Thank you for that great session.